This is a dangerous decision to make, Harstem. He made a list of proposed balance changes. Now, I have talked about balance changes that I have thought of many times before, and generally speaking, there's some people that meet it with some nice feedback, and then a lot of people that meet it with straight up hostility. Now, I'm sure Harstem knows this. Obviously, Harstem is a phenomenal player, very good. He's got a very deep understanding of StarCraft 2, much better than me, and I watch a lot of StarCraft. So, you know, this could be really good. But I've got a feeling that regardless of whether or not the list is good, this is going to spark outrage.
In today's video, I will be going over my list of proposed balance changes.
Okay, here's my list of proposed balance changes. Do I want to do this? I don't know. There's a few things that I think we can maybe change a little bit. The first one that pops in my mind that I still think is stupid. They, at some point, nerfed the Baneling, and Banelings now have 5 less hit points. I think that is something that should be reverted. We should go back to the way that it always was. Sorry, by the way, to Harstem that I decided to pause frame it right over here. I think across the board, Zerg right now is struggling quite hard unless they have like a clean early game. I also think in general, I honestly feel like across the board, the game is really quite good right now. There's really not a whole lot of complaining you can do. A lot of balance can also be done, mostly by, you know, just changing the maps and all that, right? I think that makes it very interesting. But I would, if I could make one change, I think I would revert the Baneling HP nerf. Because it's just a little bit too much. Other than that, I think the game is good.
It's a very short list. It's more of a first amendment, I would even call it, to Balance Patch 5.0.14. The Balance Patch that got released in November 2024. Now, as we'll be going over those few changes that I have come up with, I'll also be explaining why I believe they're necessary and where I currently believe the problems are in each individual matchup. Now, starting with Protoss versus Terran. In the Protoss versus Terran early game right now, it is very common for Protoss players to use a sentry to figure out what the Terran is doing. In order to do
this. Yeah, Sentry first builds or like Sentry second type of builds have become very popular in PvT. And it basically means that Protoss can scout indefinitely, which is pretty neat. Protoss has basically gone from not being able to scout properly at all to being able to scout everything all of the time. Energy recharge cooldown decreased to 30 seconds. Energy recharge now recharges 50 energy instead of 100. Okay, so this basically doubles the amount of energy it takes for the Nexus. So it's going to cost you a chrono boost in order to still get the same effectiveness.
They need to build a fast sentry, usually before their first stack structure, so it delays the Protoss stack a little bit. But then once they have the sentry, they can pretty much hallucination scout forever without any major drawback in the rest of the build order. My two changes aimed to change this are the energy recharge cooldown, decreasing it to 30 seconds. Right now it is 60 seconds, so that is halving it. And then energy recharge now recharges 50 energy instead of 100 energy. So this theoretically still allows you to get the same amount of energy added onto a sentry during the course of a game, because you can still do 100 energy per minute. However, it will cost you more Nexus energy. That means if you want full information with scouting, with hallucinations, if you want more Guardian Shield, you will be cutting either into your Blink research time, because you can't use Chrono Boost on that, or on your economy, because you can't Chrono Boost your probes. So
I am not really a PvT expert, I would say, but it does feel a little bit difficult for Terrans to be able to, like, deny early game scouting. This seems like a very reasonable change. Not really anything that is particularly significant. Like, this is a very much so a 1% of the 1% type of change. Because you can still get the same amount of energy. It's just going to take more energy from the Nexus to be able to recharge. This is a very tame change.
This basically, it still allows Pro.
This one over here, I think the community is going to have, okay.
If a Protoss player says, hey,
I really
want to be safe, I want to know what is going on, they can still use the same exact amount of scouting. There will be no issue there, but it is going to cost them a little bit more. And I think generally, in StarCraft 2, it is good to have a trait for safety to economy or greediness. And right now, it doesn't really feel like that's the case. A single energy recharge allows you double hallucinations and pretty much all info you want for the first 5 minutes. With this change, you will need to use 100 energy for that. So it's going to be more expensive for Protoss players. Now, I don't necessarily believe that the Protoss versus Terran early game is extremely Protoss favored or extremely Terran favored. I actually think it is pretty even right now. I just think it's a good change that if you have something that allows you way more information, if there is a certain cost associated with it. And
yeah, so this gives more flexibility at the cost of slightly... Like, you have to make more decisions. I feel like making things that force you to make more decisions and make the game more strategic is pretty much always good.
With these changes, that will be a little bit more in balance with one another. Now, moving on into the mid-game of Protoss versus Terran, I think there currently is a very big discrepancy in who is favored there.
Yes.
So
currently, Terran players are all-inning a ton. Terran players are going for a lot of SCV pools against Protoss, and if you're not literally max specs or hero, we're basically losing the game. It's kind of weird. I mean, it's very holdable, but it's also quite difficult to actually pull off reliably every single time. The main reason, though, why a lot of Terrans are going for those non-stop all-ins, and why they're trying their best to, like, not die, or not play the macro game, is because it's really difficult for Terran to play the macro game if Protoss gets a flying start, because you just warp in a gajillion gateway units. Like, it's not uncommon for Protoss to take, like, a 5th base by the time that Terran has their 3rd. You know what I mean? Like, they sometimes are, like, 2 bases up, and it is difficult for Terran to actually claw their way back into it. Like, if you're somebody like Clem, who never really lets go of pressure, and who just constantly hits in your face, yeah, Protoss has a hard time doing it, but it's that very momentum-based army that if you play a little bit more macro-focused, it's very tough to not let Protoss get like, absolutely out of control.
Protoss and Terran are about...
So Dark Templar can attack immediately after blinking. This is something that Blizzard changed for no apparent reason other than Terrans struggling against losing their planetaries. I think this is something that should be reverted, much like the Baneling change, for what it's worth. This seemed like a stupid change. I don't like this change. They should definitely bring it back, so Dark Templar can once again attack immediately after blinking. It's the same like the Baneling nerf for the... Oh, look, there we go. All right, Harstem also has the same thing. Okay, sorry.
Or Protoss is favored in the mid game. I think it is very easy for Protoss to run away with the game. We've seen this very frequently where they play low gas styles, get 5, 6 bases before the Terran can even set up a 4th base of their own. And as a result, Terrans just end up dying to massive waves of Zealot, Stalker, Colossus, of high gateway counts, where even if the Protoss takes bad fights, it doesn't really matter because they're outmining the opponent.
You can Zerg as Protoss.
Hard. A big issue here, in my mind, is the lack of map control that Terran can take in the mid game and deny these outside bases. Now, in order to help Terran get back on the map, I would like to revert a previously nerfed thing, and that is that the Widow Mine will become invisible again after the armory finishes. This allows Widow Mines to get map control on the map. This used to be the case. Terran used to have a much easier time being out.
Look, this is one of those changes that's really nice for the absolute best players in the world. Because the best players in the world can actually deal with this sort of thing, because it's an incredibly APM-intensive thing to play against. So he's saying Widow Mines can once more become invisible after the armory finishes. This sucks for everybody that's not a pro gamer. Which is basically everybody. It's always a trade-off, right? Like, how do you balance a game around both the absolute, like, top of the competition, which is how StarCraft ultimately works. The only reason the game still exists 15 years after the release is because there is a competitive scene. But obviously, there's also a lot of people that like to just play the game and, yeah, have fun. And this is one of those things that makes it worse for, like, the vast majority of the player base. If it is indeed a problem, then... And that's obviously the question, right? Is it a problem that Protoss can kind of become the Zerg against Terrans? Or can Terran actually try to stop that a little bit before that point? If it is indeed a problem, maybe we should come up with a solution, but I don't think that making Widow Mines invisible again is the way to do it.
On the map. Nowadays, not so much anymore. I think this will help a lot. I am not sure if it's going to be enough to balance that mid game once more, but it's going to be a helpful harassment tool once more in the mid game, forcing cannons out of the Protoss, perhaps slowing that.
Like, the thing is, at the highest level, we rarely see people take a lot of damage from Widow Mines. Because everybody's so good at countering them. Right? But below the highest level, aka everybody on the ladder, like the Widow Mine is one of the most hated units in the entire game. People freaking hate playing against Widow Mines. I really don't like obviously it's always an APM balance, right? So there's always like a attack that costs a certain amount of APM, and then a defense that costs a certain amount of APM too. And it's always going to be a little bit out of whack. But I feel like Widow Mines are one of those units that like are very easy to set up, only takes a few actions, but are way harder to actually deal with. I don't think that like set and forget, just burrow them somewhere all over the map and hope for the best is great game design in the first place, but that's another discussion. Yeah, I've never really liked Widow Mines much, to be honest. I think they're okay, like they're kind of nice to have, but I don't know. Like buffing frustrating units is always a bit risky.
Expansion pace, as well as allowing Terran to hold positions a little bit more easily, forcing Protoss players to build observers more frequently as well. So just forcing a lot of things, a lot of investment out of Protoss in the
I like this for the highest level.
Is already going to be quite a game changer.
I like this for the absolute highest level. I don't like this for everybody else, so I don't really like it.
Moving on to the late game. Currently, if Protoss plays a low gas style, which is the most common way of playing, 4 gas, and then gets into a late game, even with a very high base count, it still feels like the Protoss army falls flat against what the Terran does. It is difficult to get anything done against the Terran that's on 5 bases, 2 planetaries, bunch of liberators out on the map. Getting decent trades, getting good harassment in is practically impossible in my mind. So in order to help Protoss create more active games, I would like the Dark Templar to be capable of attacking immediately again after blinking. So this is also a reverse of a previously nerfed ability. Dark Templars used to be capable of instantly slashing something down.
I 100% agree.
Nowadays, I think there's a 0.7 second delay or something along those lines, where they wait a bit, then they start smacking the planetary. This is going to be very helpful in jumping on top of armies, but mainly helpful when jumping on top of planetaries and other buildings, maybe a turret or something like that. So
this was a weird change. I don't think it's really necessary at all. I think I could 100% change that back. Oh, another change they made to the game over the last few years that I found really stupid is that they halved the cost of the gas for building an armory. Like, the idea was to buff Terran mech or something. Like, that at least was the reasoning. Like, we made armories cost 50 gas instead of 100. Because now Terrans can make 2 of them, and you can... It actually is just a straight-up buff to Terran bio, which I found kind of weird. I think you should... if we're gonna do something like this, they should make the armory more expensive for certain. But I don't know, man. Like, I agree that balancing the game for the absolute best of the players is the way to go. I think that's really the only realistic way to balance a competitive game, to balance it around competitive play. But at the same time, if it is absolutely detrimental to everybody else, I don't think it's a good change.
I think that's going to be a good change as well. Up next, we have the Zerg changes, starting with the evolution chamber now enables ventral sex mutation. That is also known as the drop.
Okay. So Harstem is saying, instead of a lair, make it so that overlords can drop Zerglings when you build an Evo chamber. I think Zerg currently is very limited. Like, when's the last time you've seen Zerg do something interesting in the early game? Basically, all Zerg does in the current meta of StarCraft 2 is try to not die and then overwhelm in the mid game. I don't mind it, but it would be nice if there is a little bit of early game variety. This would give some sort of like early game. I'm trying to think if there's like all-ins that would be difficult to pull off. I mean, oracles can now get their energy recharge, so you can actually get the energy on them quite easily, so you don't just die to Zerglings as quickly. Terrans should be able to deal with something like this too. I actually kind of like it. This could be too strong with specific timing attacks, but I think you can play around it. I mean, it's been a long time since Zergs have actually, like, done anything aggressive in the early game, so I wonder if it's, you know, maybe we do see some Roach Ravager Ling all-ins every once in a while, but it's super rare. You could basically go for a Roach Ravager Ling all-in, and then also bring a bunch of queens across the map.
Lord. This used to be in the game already. Back then it got taken out because specifically Protoss players struggled massively with Ling drop all-ins and early game Ling drop harass.
Yeah.
I personally believe this is not going to be the case.
No, Oracles can deal with that now.
Because the energy recharge exists.
Yeah.
Back in the day, if you had an Oracle shooting at Lings, eventually it would run out of energy. Now with energy recharge, it's not going to run out of energy, making it much easier to defend these types of attacks. However, the evolution chamber enabling the drop will still allow Zerg with a variety of different early game builds. Right now, in Zerg versus Protoss, as well in Zerg versus Terran, it feels like Zerg is just sitting there taking a bunch of abuse in the first 4 or 5 minutes of the game, and there's really not any all-ins that we see pre-layer.
Yeah, if you disagree with this change, you support bullying. Alright? This is how it goes. If you disagree with this change, you think bullying is a good thing.
Is done, or any major pressure that we see out of Zerg pre-layer is done whatsoever. Every now and again we see a Ling run by against Terran, but even that is pretty much falling out of fashion. I would love to see Zerg have a more active early game, or at least have the ability to have a more active early game. And as the only thing that was stopping it, the Oracle defense not being strong enough, has now been pretty much fixed. I think this would be good to reintroduce it.
What if I support bullying, but I also support this change, Lowko?
Changing the early game, I think, will have give us a bigger variety of early games, and will make it a bit more fun for Zerg players that tend to have more aggressive tendencies to also play.
Are Zerg players allowed to have fun? An important question we gotta ask ourselves: are Zerg players allowed to have a fun time? It is very true though. Like, Zerg basically just sits there in the early game and tries to not die until they can start playing the game when they go up to lair tech. Because basically nothing that Zerg can make early on actually is difficult to deal with. Unless you, like, don't put a unit in the wall off or whatever and Zerglings run in, but, like, pretty much all Zerg early game is completely nullified in 2025. So we just don't see aggression from Zergs. Every once in a while it's like a proxy hatch. Yeah, once in a blue moon. Extremely rare and very risky. Now with Dark off to the military, I don't think we're gonna see that a whole lot. I feel like this is a good change, yes.
Centrifugal hooks will now grant +5 health on Banelings.
That's a revert?
The reasons here are twofold. Reason number one is going to be Zerg versus Protoss. The Baneling, in my mind, is one of the most iconic units in StarCraft 2, but definitely for Zerg. And hardly having it see any play in this matchup kind of sucks. We see some all-ins with it.
So Blizzard basically did like a classic Blizzard change, right? Where they double nerfed units. This is something that Blizzard loves to do. Double or triple nerf units is one of their absolute favorite things. I believe it was the same patch where they removed the +5 health on Banelings, where they also made it that Banelings can no longer, with +2 melee, one-shot probes. Now, these are very specific changes, but it was one of those things where, like, if you double nerf the core unit of the matchup, naturally nobody's gonna play that anymore, and it's just kind of dumb. I kind of missed the times that Ravager Ling Bane was a legit unit composition against Protoss. Now, I actually looked into this recently, right? So immediately people will say, like, hey, if you give them 5 additional HP, what about Terran? Like, this is a good change for Zerg versus Protoss, but what if Banelings have 5 more HP against Terran? Well, that is what Zerg players had for, like, 95% of StarCraft 2's existence. Like, the patch where they removed 5 HP from Banelings, Terran did not get compensated in any way. So, like, they just removed 5 HP on Banelings, and Terran was not made any weaker. It's pretty nuts. Like, we still see so many Banelings in StarCraft 2 and ZVT. It was just a straight nerf to Zerg, and I don't know. I think it was a bit silly. Like, double nerfing anything is pretty much always a waste. At least in, like, a game as well refined as StarCraft 2, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I feel like reverting this would make a lot of sense.
But the moment multiple Templar with Storms are out, the unit completely falls off a cliff. So we're not seeing any Ravager Ling Bane into Ultra action or just
Yep.
Hydra Ling Bane for like a longer period of time. And I think this would be very cool to have back just the ability to stay on an actual Baneling composition rather than the moment you build a Baneling nest, you're pretty much on a timer having to kill your opponent. So
Yeah.
I think it would be very good for Zerg versus Protoss. And in Zerg versus Terran, I think right now it might have actually become a necessity. In the current Zerg versus Terran metagame, about 40 to 50% of all high-level games result in an 8 Rex all-in out of the Terran. And Zerg players are struggling mightily to deal with this. Now, I don't mind when a race does an all-in and it works, but it
I feel like that's
right
an
now,
extreme number. Maybe it's because I only look at like the absolute best players when I cast games. We don't see 8 Rex that frequently with the absolute very best, but yeah, it's good.
Terrans before the game could tell a Zerg player, hey, I'm going to 8 Rex you, I'm going to hit at this exact timing with this amount of units, good luck. Even then it becomes kind of impossible for the Zerg to hard counter it. It's still an extremely hard build to hold. And I don't think that is how all-ins should be. And in general, we see a lot of these mid-game pushes just kind of killing Zerg players with the tanks. So
The main problem is it, like, if you take any damage as a Zerg player early on, even if it's just a handful of drones, but if you lose like a queen or whatever, you basically die to the 8 Rex immediately. Because you can only really hold the 8 Rex if you play a perfect early game. And if you don't play a perfect early game, GG.
From Banelings, I think will help.
Feels a bit
massively
harsh.
there. Of course, it's also going to buff Zerg in the late game, so that is definitely something to keep in mind. Another thing, by the way, that it might help with, although I'm not sure how big it is that perhaps we might see some Mutaling Bane play again in Zerg versus
Yes,
Terran,
please!
which, in my mind, is the most fun composition, and I think it's an absolute shame that we're not seeing a lot of Muta games nowadays.
I would actually... I don't know. I think Mutaling Bane is awesome, but Mutaling Bane is difficult to get to. I wonder if you could, and like maybe this is too much, but I wonder if you could reduce the build time of the Spire. Or maybe you could like make the Spire not cost 200, but like 150. Something along those lines. I don't think that would be too much. But I would like to see something to encourage Mutaling Bane play. I kind of miss it. We rarely see it these days.
In this matchup whatsoever. Before I get into my last two changes, I want to talk a little bit about
These
Zerg.
two changes are pretty nuts, by the way. Microbial Shroud now negates 50% of spell damage. I think that's too good. That's way too good. But I would like to hear Harstem's reasoning. Infestors are not capable of moving while burrowed anymore. This is for Zerg versus Terran mostly, because Terran players refuse making ravens. Nobody knows why, but they never make ravens. They like to make command centers instead. Now, I get why they don't make ravens, but like, you could make a raven.
Zerg versus Protoss. Right now, what we're seeing a lot in Zerg versus Protoss, out of Protoss players, is that they'll open up with Blink.
Yeah.
Very often, they don't even move out with Blink. They rush into a Templar Archives, then they rush into a Fleet Beacon and double Stargate Tempest, and they sit on 4 bases, slowly crawling to a 5th with lots of cannons, with Templar, with Tempest. Once they get 4 base, 8 gases going, with Templar, Tempest, and cannons, it feels like the win rate for Zerg falls off a cliff. So Zerg players, they all in, they try to stop the Protoss from going there, and Protoss tries to make the game as...
Anything that encourages turtle-based play is bad, in my opinion. I really dislike turtle-based styles. I think turtling is fun when both players decide to sit back and turtle. Then it can be interesting. But most of the time when we see turtling, actually all of the time when we see turtling in StarCraft 2 historically, it's because one race can't beat another race in the late game. So right now it seems that Protoss late game armies, unless you're Serral about 50% of the time, late game Protoss is essentially not winnable for Zerg players, even at the absolute highest level. So what we naturally get is Zerg players trying to all in, and Protoss players trying to turtle, right? And that's the two camps we end up with. We've seen this countless times before. This is mostly due to the most recent changes that they made to the game, like making the mothership unabductable, I think is a good change, but there was nothing given to Zergs to compensate for that. Technically, I guess you could say that Microbial Shroud changes were given to the Zerg for that change, but I mean, Microbial Shroud is an absolute meme of a spell. It can be good. If you give 50% spell damage to Microbial Shroud, like spell damage reduction, I think it might be too good. Maybe it's fine? I would like to see this tested, but this could actually absolutely wipe Protoss off the map. But I don't know.
Boring as humanly possible. The more stable the game, the better for the Protoss. I think this is generally bad. You want both races to have about an even chance in the late game, so that both races want to get ahead in the mid game. If one race is just much better in the late game, they don't care about being ahead in the mid game. As long as they get to the late game in some state of being alive, it's going to be absolutely fine. So what I would like to do is give the Infestor, the Microbial Shroud ability, allowing that to negate 50% of spell damage. This is going to help mess.
That would make Ultra Hydra Infestor a banger of a unit composition. We've seen it a little bit before in the past. At the very least, it would make Corruptors not your only way to deal with flying units, which could be kind of fun. I don't know. Like maybe, okay, look, maybe this is a cool idea. Maybe the 50% number, in my mind, it seems a little high. Maybe the number should be lower. But, you know, yeah, testing it doesn't seem to hurt anything. I think everybody agrees that Corruptors as really your only form of anti-air is a bit stupid. The thing, though, is that this would massively help as well. Against loads of things, right? So maybe in ZVP this would be testable, but what about Zerg versus Terran? Would this also reduce damage dealt by snipe by 50%? Would that be okay? Maybe if you change this, you can actually make Ghosts 2 supply again. Could we do this and then make Ghosts 2 supply again rather than 3? Could be interesting.
Specifically for ground composition, Lurker Hydra, but also things like Ravagerling Bane.
And maybe if Ghosts are 2 supply again, maybe Terrans won't struggle as much against the mass expansion style from Protoss. Maybe you could do that instead of the Widowmine change.
Ultralisk or just any ground composition will help it massively against Storm, which seems to be the one tool that all Protoss players love rushing into right now. Now, you could say, well, if you add that into an already existing lurker push, isn't that going to make the lurker push much stronger? And that could be true. However, even just getting 2 infestors is already 300 gas. That means that a lurker push that's now running with 9 lurkers would instead hit with just the 6 lurkers, which is significantly worse. If it still remains an issue, you could always say, hey,
yeah, like it feels weird that the Ghost is 3 supply. Because it's such a blunt nerf, right? So basically they changed the unit to 3 supply from 2, which is just a significant straight up nerf that has 0. It's blunt, right? There's nothing delicate about it. There's nothing you can subtly adjust about that and maybe dial it back a little bit. It's like 2 or 3, that's it. But 3 is a big nerf. 2 supply felt, you know, reasonable. You can't make something 2.5 supply. They could have made it so that the spells are more expensive or the unit is more expensive or whatever. But like going from 2 to 3 just feel... And honestly, if you were to make a guess like how much supply is a infantry unit, 3 supply just feels weird. I mean, I know that is like the least important part, but in my mind, a 3 supply Ghost just feels weird. 2 supply feels reasonable. Anyway.
Is going to be something that needs to be upgraded so that it costs even another 100 gas, for example, making these pushes less viable. I think it's important that, yes, it can be used in pushes, but also this really should be a late game tool, allowing Zerg to trade
Make them spawn in pairs and cost double and cost 5 supply, so they're 2.5 supply each.
Better with ground-focused armies. So yeah, that is the main change. Now, of course, there's also going to be issues for Terran in the late game. I mean, you're buffing the Banelings, and now you're also adding in Microbial Shroud, dealing better with spell damage. It's going to be significantly more difficult for Terran, and that's why I want to remove the Infestor of moving while being burrowed. One of the things that a lot of Terrans have been talking about, or have been complaining about, is that in the late game, they would love to attack. They would love to be out on the map. But
Make a
being out of
Raven!
the map, away from missile turrets, is impossible for them. Because the moment they walk on the
Make
map,
a
where
Raven!
6, 7, 8 goes, and they get fungled, they lose the game. And they can't continuously scan. In the mid game, they don't have 12 orbital commands yet. They might only have 4. You don't want to be scanning every bit of the map before you move there in case there's an infestor burrowed. So
I kind of agree. To be fair, like, infestors are very oppressive. Then again, in the most recent patch, they nerfed the vision range of a burrowed unit, like the burrowed infestor. They could nerf it more. I feel like that would be a more delicate change than this. Just reduce the vision range of the burrowed infestor by like another couple of, I don't know, whatever. I like, because those are like spectacular plays, right? Where we see a Zerg player setting up the trap and they're trying to almost like hurt the Protoss in that direction. That would be way harder to do if you can't move while burrowed. I think that's a cool moment. Very different from like a Widowmine that you just kind of burrow and forget about. This is something that actually promotes active gameplay quite a bit. Yeah, Protoss players or Terran players sometimes feel like they can't move out onto the map so much, but, you know, they will just make more orbitals, and at some point they can just scan indefinitely. Or they could make a freaking Raven, man. I know nobody makes Ravens, but... Maybe increase the detection range or the detection radius of the Raven. Would that be reasonable? Because rarely do we see anybody make a Raven for detection. I feel like that would be a much more interesting dial to turn, rather than making this less strategic. Maybe I can make my own list here, based off of Harstem's list. Can we do that? Apparently I'm entering the debate, guys. I don't know, maybe this is a bad idea. Anyways. Energy recharge. Recharge to 30 seconds. Energy recharge to 50 energy. Dark Templar can now attack immediately. Ghosts back to 2 supply. And also, I find this one stupid. Armory back to 100 gas. I still find it stupid that they ever changed that, but honestly, this doesn't really matter. I just have a personal gripe with that. Anyways, Evo Chamber unlocks drops. I think that's good. Centrifugal Hook, so Bane Speed, plus 5 HP. So this is a revert. This is a revert. This is a revert. This is also a revert. All of these are reverted changes. Honestly, I feel like it's reasonable. Microbial Shroud now negates X% of spell damage. I feel like 50 might be too much. And then rather than infestors not being able to... and then we also, yeah, increase radius of Raven detection by X. I don't know what X needs to be. I don't know what the value needs to be. But I feel like something like this would be reasonable. Maybe there's something I'm overlooking, though. Like, maybe there's something here that would be... a bit too much. The reason I'm saying Ghost can go back to 2 supply is because this would also be a counterplay to Ghosts in a way, which could be kind of fun. Like, imagine you see a Ghost lining up a snipe on an Ultralisk, and you quickly throw down a Microbial Shroud onto the Ultralisks, assuming it would negate, say, 50% of spell damage. It could be kind of fun.
That this change will allow Terran to be more aggressive.
I honestly think this is actually a pretty good list. I feel like the people... I haven't seen the community respond to this yet, but I feel like people are going to lose their shit over the Widowmine change.
In kind of the transitionary phase from mid to late game. And also just make it a bit easier to walk away from their own missile turrets, while giving Zerg a powerful tool in Microbial Shroud and the buffed Centrifugal Hooks to burst into positions, and hopefully allowing more active more active late games. And all of these changes really are kind of aimed at that, at trying to make the game less stable in every stage of the game. Because when things are happening, the game...
So Harstem is not basically saying, right? Like what this all comes down to is that this is not a list that would make the game more balanced. Because the game is pretty balanced right now. Like everybody seems to agree that the game is mostly pretty balanced. Obviously, it will never be perfect. But this makes the game more interesting. And I think, in general, more passive play is less interesting. So, the more active play we can have, the less turtling we can have, the better it becomes.
Tends to be more fun. Like, I'm not a huge fan of watching a guy sit behind a cannon line, sieging into 12 spores with his Tempest. That is not why StarCraft is so beautiful to me. I would love there to be as many interactions as possible, and then whoever manages all these interactions the best should be the winner in my mind. And I think this set of changes will help quite a bit in achieving that. So I put them out here. I gave you guys my reasoning. Now, if you don't agree with any of the changes, but you agree with what is wrong with the game, then please give me an alternative set of changes. Or if you think we should, change some of the numbers in any of these changes, then I'm completely open to
Harstem
it.
is being insanely reasonable, chat. How can I be outraged when the man is being this reasonable and communicative and he's explaining his thoughts and feelings and, he actually has a very good understanding of the game. How can I be outraged? It's 2025. I need to be outraged about something.
As well, just give some feedback on that. If you think, well, your premise is wrong, actually, Terran is completely busted, we should be taking out the Marine, then be sure to tell me.
Yeah, take out the Marine, dude. Ultralisks should be able to morph into giant banelings. All right. Don't take away Sharking Infestors. As a viewer is really cool. Yeah. This is the darkest timeline. Even the captain is trying to nerf the Infestor. No, I think it's fine. I think Sharking Infestors are fun. The making of a Raven is not even mentioned. It's just assumed that the Terrans can't possibly be building a Raven. Yeah. It's a pretty significant issue with F2 that every pro Terran has to use it due to how many Terran units makes. Yeah, it's tricky. Ravens are expensive and difficult to control properly, right? But I would like them to... Like, if you could dream up your perfect late-game army, in theory, Ravens should always be part of it. We see Zerg players forced to use every spellcaster and every drop of, like, juice that you can squeeze out of any... Serral is always building all spellcasters. I understand the game's hard, and I understand... But I find, like, it's too difficult, so we're not gonna do it. I find that a very weak play. I find that a weak reasoning. Also, there is currently a bug with the Cyclone. Cyclone lock-on bug fixed. We need to fix this, please. Because apparently the cooldown is like 33% too quick. There's something that bugged with the most recent balance changes. This is something that Blizzard should definitely have already fixed. It would make sense to change that. Okay. We are going to do something crazy. We're going to go to the StarCraft 2 subreddit and see what the people on the StarCraft 2 subreddit are saying. I believe, without having seen this, that people are losing their mind. Where is it? People must be losing their minds over Widow Mines. People on Reddit hate Widow Mines, man. Maybe they could give Terrans a flying unit that is good at detecting, give it a few spells that are useful in combat and tools for harassment. It would have to be used intelligently, which is why it would be named after like an intelligent bird, maybe like a crow or something along those lines. Good point, Joe. Sharking Infestors are great for the spectator, keep them in. Yep. Microbial Shroud protecting from spell damage, let's go. Terran's not building Raka, everybody's just on the Raven. No burrow infestor movement makes neural versus mech armies a lot harder. We rarely see mech. I don't know if it's a problem. Oh, people aren't even talking about the Widow Mine. People are being pretty communicative, though. It's nice to see. I feel like back in the day, everybody was... a lot more shouty. Storm, High Templar, Fungal, Parabomb, Steady Targeting from Ghosts. So that's the snipe ability. EMP from Ghosts. Oh my god, you could Microbial Shroud your own Infestors to make sure you don't take maximum amount of damage from EMP. Which means that you have to use energy to not lose energy. Dang, that's some big brain stuff right there. Widow Mines? Yeah, Widow Mines could be an issue, I guess. What? All right, buddy. Let's go to the most downvoted one. Let's see. Let me guess. He wants to nerf Terran and buff Protoss. That is not Harstem, dude. Zerg is unquestionably favored in the ZVT late game, at least in Grandmaster. Even Snake, who admits it, and he's notorious for complaining. Well, whatever it comes down to, right? We're not gonna see a balance update now before the World Cup. But maybe in like, you know, maybe after the EWC championships. Maybe we can see some changes then. Snake is a 5k NA player who only cheeses? Okay. Well, we should all take his advice. Maybe.